Assassin's Creed Brotherhood by Oliver Bowden. Narrated by Gilbert Jackson. Copyright 2010 by Ubisoft Entertainment Limited. This unabridged audiobook is recorded by arrangement with the Berkeley Publishing Group, a member of Penguin Group USA, Incorporated. Copyright 2012, Ubisoft Entertainment. Author's Note. Most of the translations from foreign languages in the text are my own, but for the quotations from Machiavelli's The Prince and the quotation from Virgil's The Eclogues, though I have adapted the latter very slightly. I am indebted to the late scholars George Bull, 1929 to 2001, and E. V. Rieu, 1887 to 1972, respectively. Oliver Bowden, Paris, 2010. Prologue. The events of the past extraordinary 15 minutes, which might have been 15 hours, even days, so long had they seemed, ran through Ezio's head once more as he stumbled, his brain reeling, from the vault beneath the Sistine Chapel. He remembered, though it seemed like a dream, that in the depths of the vault he had seen a vast sarcophagus made of what looked like granite. As he'd approached it, it had begun to glow, but with a light that was welcoming. He touched its lid, and it had opened, as if it were light as a feather. From it a warm yellow light glowed, and from within that glow arose a figure whose features Ezio could not make out, although he knew he was looking at a woman of unnatural stature, who wore a helmet, and on whose right shoulder sat a tawny owl. The light surrounding her was blinding. "Greetings, O prophet," she said, calling him by the name that had been mysteriously assigned to him. "I have been waiting for you for 10,000 seasons." Ezio dared not look up. "Show me the apple." Humbly, Ezio proffered it. "Ah." Her hand caressed the air over it, but she did not touch it. It glowed and pulsated. Her eyes bore into him. "We must speak." She tilted her head, as if considering something. Ezio, raising his head, thought he could see the trace of a smile on the iridescent face. "Who are you?" "Oh, many names have I. When I died, it was Minerva." Ezio recognized the name. "Goddess of wisdom. The owl on your shoulder, the helmet, of course." He bowed his head. "We are gone now. The gods your forefathers worshipped, Juno, queen of the gods, and my father, Jupiter, its king, who brought me forth to life through his forehead. I was the daughter, not of his loins, but of his brain." Ezio was transfixed. He looked at the statues ranged around the walls, Venus, Mercury, Vulcan, Mars. There was a noise like glass breaking in the distance, or the sound a falling star might make. It was her laughter. "No, not gods. We simply came before. Even when we walked the world, humankind struggled to understand our existence. We were just more advanced in time." She paused. "But although you may not comprehend us, you must take note of our warning." "I do not understand." "Don't be frightened. I wish to speak to you, but also through you. You are the chosen one for your time, the prophet." Ezio felt a mother's warmth embrace all his weariness. Minerva raised her arms above her, and the roof of the vault became the firmament. Her glittering face bore an expression of inexpressible sadness. "Listen and see." Ezio could hardly bear the memory. He had seen the whole earth and the heavens surrounding it as far as the Milky Way, the galaxy, and his mind could barely comprehend his vision. He saw a world, his world, destroyed by man, and a windswept plain. But then he saw people, broken, ephemeral, but undismayed. "We gave you Eden," said Minerva, "but it became Hades. The world burned until naught remained but ash. But we created you in our image, And we created you, whatever you did, however much cancerous evil was in you, by choice, because we gave you choice to survive. And we rebuilt. After the devastation, we rebuilt the world, and it has become, after eons, the world you know and inhabit. We endeavored to ensure that such a tragedy would never again be repeated. Ezio looked at the sky again, a horizon. On it temples and shapes, carvings in stone like writing, libraries full of scrolls and ships and cities and music and dancing, shapes and forms from ancient civilizations he didn't know, but recognized as the work of his fellow beings. But now, my people are dying, Minerva was saying, and time will work against us. Truth will be turned into myth and legend. But Ezio, prophet and leader, though you have the physical force of a mere human, your will ranks with ours, and in you my words shall be preserved. Ezio gazed at her, entranced. Let my words also bring hope, Minerva continued, but you must be quick, for time grows short. Guard against the Borgia, guard against the Templar cross. The vault darkened. Minerva and Ezio were alone in it, bathing in a fading glow of warm light. My people must now leave this world, but the message is delivered. It is up to you now. We can do no more. And then there was darkness and silence, and the vault became a mere underground cellar again, with nothing in it at all. And yet... Ezio made his way out, glancing at the writhing body of Rodrigo Borgia, the Spaniard, Pope Alexander VI, leader of the Templar faction, bloody in his apparent death agonies. But Ezio could not bring himself now to deliver a coup de grace. The man seemed to be dying by his own hand. From the look of him, Rodrigo had taken poison, no doubt the same cantarella he had administered to so many of his enemies. Well, let him find his own way to the Inferno. Ezio would not give him the mercy of an easy death. He made his way out of the gloom of the Sistine Chapel, out into the sunshine. Once on the portico, he could see his friends and fellow assassins, members of the Brotherhood, at whose side he had lived so many adventures and survived so many dangers, waiting for him. Part 1. It cannot be called prowess to kill fellow citizens, to betray them, to be treacherous, pitiless, irreligious. These ways can win a prince power, but not glory. Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince. 1. Ezio stood for a moment, dazed and disoriented. Where was he? What was this place? As he slowly regained his senses, he saw his uncle Mario detach himself from a crowd of people and approach him, taking his arm. Ezio, are you all right? There was a fight with the Pope, with Rodrigo Borgia. I left him for dead. Ezio trembled violently. He could not help himself. Could it be real? Seconds earlier, though it seemed like 100 years ago, he had been involved in a life-and-death struggle with the man he most hated and feared, the leader of the Templars, the vicious organization bent to the last on the destruction of the world Ezio and his friends in the Brotherhood of the Assassins had fought so hard to protect. But he had beaten them. He had used the great powers of the mysterious artifact, the apple, the sacred piece of Eden vouchsafed by the old gods to him to ensure that their investment in humanity did not vanish in bloodshed and iniquity. And he had emerged triumphant. Or had he? What had he said? I left him for dead? And Rodrigo Borgia, the vile old man who had clawed his way to the head of the church and ruled it as pope, had indeed seemed to be dying. He had taken poison. But now a hideous doubt gripped Ezio. In showing mercy, mercy that was at the core of the assassin's creed, and which should, he knew, be granted to all but those whose life would endanger the rest of mankind. Had he, in fact, been weak? If he had, he would never let his doubt show, not even to his Uncle Mario, leader of the Brotherhood. He squared his shoulders. He had left the old man to die by his own hand. He had left him with time to pray. He had not stabbed him through the heart to make sure of him. A cold hand closed over his heart as a clear voice in his mind said, "You should have killed him." He shook himself to rid himself of his demons as a dog shakes itself to throw off water after a swim. But still his thoughts dwelled on his mystifying experience in the strange vault beneath the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican in Rome. The building from which he had just emerged, blinking into the unfamiliar sunlight. Everything around him seemed strangely calm and normal, the buildings of the Vatican standing just as they always had, still resplendent in the bright light. The memory of what had just passed in the vault came back to him, great surges of recollection overwhelming his consciousness. There had been a vision, an encounter with a strange goddess, for there was no other way of describing the being, whom he now knew as Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. She had shown him both the distant past and the far future in such a way as to make him loathe the responsibility that the knowledge he had gained had placed on his shoulders. And whom could he share it with? How could he explain any of it? It all seemed so unreal. All he knew for sure after his experience, better call it an ordeal, was that the fight was not yet over. Perhaps one day there would be a time when he could return to his hometown of Florence and settle down with his books, drinking with his friends in winter and hunting with them in autumn, chasing girls in spring and overseeing the harvests on his estates in summer. But this was not it. In his heart he knew that the Templars and all the evil they represented were not finished. In them he was pitted against a monster with more heads than the Hydra, and, like that beast, which had taken no less of a man than Hercules to slay, all but immortal.
Ezio!
His uncle's voice was harsh, but served to snap him out of the reverie that had him in its clutches. He had to get a grip. He had to think clearly. There was a fire raging in Ezio's head. He said his name to himself as a kind of reassurance. "I am Ezio Auditore da Firenze, strong, a master of the traditions of the assassin." He went over the ground again. He didn't know whether or not he'd been dreaming. The teaching and the revelations of the strange goddess in the vault had shaken his beliefs and assumptions to the core. It was as if time itself had been stood on its head. Emerging from the Sistine Chapel, where he had left the evil Pope Alexander VI, apparently dying, he squinted again in the harsh sunlight. There were his friends, his fellow assassins, gathered around, their faces grave and set with grim determination. The thought pursued him still. Should he have killed Rodrigo, made sure of him? He had elected not to, and the man had indeed seemed bent on taking his own life, having failed in his final goal. But that clear voice still rang in Ezio's mind. And there was more. A baffling force now seemed to be drawing him back to the chapel, and he sensed that there was something left undone. Not Rodrigo, not just Rodrigo, though he would finish him now. Something else.
"What is it?"
Mario asked. "I must return," Ezio said, realizing afresh and with a lurching stomach that the game wasn't over, and that the apple should not yet pass from his hands. As the thought struck him, he was seized with an overwhelming sense of urgency. Tearing himself free of his uncle's sheltering arms, he hurried back into the gloom. Mario, bidding the others to stay where they were and to keep watch, followed. Ezio quickly reached the place where he'd left the dying Rodrigo Borgia, but the man wasn't there. A richly decorated papal damask cope lay in a heap on the floor, flecked with gore, but its owner was gone. Once again the hand, clad in an icy steel gauntlet, closed over Ezio's heart and seemed to crush it. The hidden door to the vault was, to all intents and purposes, closed, almost invisible indeed, but as Ezio approached the point where he remembered it to have been, he found that it swung open gently at his touch. He turned to his uncle and was surprised to see fear on Mario's face.
"What's in there?"
said the older man, fighting to keep his voice steady.
"The mystery,"
Ezio replied. Leaving Mario on the threshold, he walked down the dimly lit passage, hoping he was not too late, that Minerva would have foreseen this, and would show mercy. Surely Rodrigo would not have been allowed entry here. Nevertheless, Ezio kept his hidden blade, the blade his father had bequeathed him, at the ready. In the vault, the great human, yet at the same time superhuman figures, but were they statues, still stood, holding the staff. One of the pieces of Eden. The staff was apparently welded to the figure that held it, and indeed, as Ezio tried to pry it loose, the figure seemed to tighten its grip, glowing, as did the runic inscriptions on the walls of the vault. Ezio had remembered that no human hand should ever touch the apple unprotected. The figures then turned away and sank into the ground, leaving the vault void of anything save the great sarcophagus and its surrounding statues. Ezio stepped back, looking around briefly and hesitating before taking what he instinctively knew would be his final leave of this place. What was he expecting? Was he hoping that Minerva would once again manifest herself to him? But hadn't she told him all there was to tell, or at least all there was that was safe for him to know? The apple had been vouchsafed him. In combination with the apple, the other pieces of Eden would have accorded the supremacy Rodrigo craved, and Ezio understood in the fullness of his years that such united power was too dangerous for the hands of man.
"All right?"
Mario's voice, still untypically nervous, floated down to him.
"All's well,"
replied Ezio, making his way back to the light with a curious reluctance. Once reunited with his uncle, Ezio wordlessly showed him the apple.
"And the staff?"
Ezio shook his head.
"Better in the hands of the earth than in the hands of man,"
said Mario with immediate understanding.
"But you don't need me to tell you that." He shuddered visibly. "Come on, we can't linger."
"What's the hurry?"
"Everything's the hurry. Do you think Rodrigo is just going to sit back and let us stroll out of here?"
"I left him for dead."
"Not quite the same as leaving him good and dead, is it? Come on."
They made their way out of the vault then, as quickly as they could, and a cold wind seemed to follow them as they did so.
2. Where did the others go?
Ezio, his mind still reeling from his recent experiences, asked Mario as they made their way to the great nave of the Sistine Chapel. The gathered assassins were no longer there.
"I told them to go. Paola has returned to Florence, Teodora and Antonio to Venice. We need to keep ourselves covered in all Italy. The Templars are broken but not destroyed. They will regroup if our assassins' Brotherhood is not vigilant. Eternally vigilant. The rest of our company have gone ahead and will await us at our headquarters in Monteriggioni."
They were keeping watch.
"So they were, but they knew when their duty was done. Ezio, there is no time to waste. We all know that."
Mario's face was earnest.
"I should have made sure of Rodrigo Borgia." "Did he harm you in the fight?"
"My armor protected me." Mario clapped his nephew on the back.
"I spoke hastily before. I think you were right to decide not to kill needlessly. I have always advised moderation. You thought of him as good as dead by his own hand. Who knows? Perhaps he was faking, or perhaps he genuinely failed to give himself a fatal dose of poison. Either way, we must deal with the situation as it is now and not waste energy pondering what we might have done. In any case, we sent you, one man, against an entire army of Templars. You've done more than your part, and I am still your old uncle, and I've been worried about you. Come on, Ezio. We have to get out of here. We have work to do, and the last thing we need is to get cornered by Borgia guards.
You wouldn't believe the things I've seen, Uncle.
Just be sure to stay alive, then, that I may hear of them. Listen, I've stabled some horses just beyond St. Peter's, outside the precincts of the Vatican. Once we reach them, we'll be able to make our way safely from here. The Borgia will try to stop us, I expect.
Mario flashed a broad grin.
Of course they will, and I expect the Borgia to mourn the loss of many lives tonight.
In the chapel, Ezio and his uncle were surprised to find themselves faced with a number of priests, who had returned to complete the Mass interrupted by Ezio's confrontation with the Pope, as he and Rodrigo had battled for control of the pieces of Eden they had discovered. The priests confronted them angrily, surrounding them and clamoring, "Che cosa fate qui? What are you doing here?" they yelled. "You have desecrated the sanctity of this holy place, and assassini! God will see that you pay for your crimes!" As Mario and Ezio pushed their way through the angry throng, the bells of St. Peter's began to ring the alarm. "You condemn what you do not understand," said Ezio to a priest who was trying to bar their way. The softness of the man's body repelled him. He shoved him aside as gently as possible.
"We must go, Ezio," said Mario urgently. "Now!"
"His is the voice of the devil," another priest's voice rang out. And another, "Turn away from them!" Ezio and Mario pushed their way through the mob and out into the great courtyard of the church. There they were confronted by a sea of red robes. It seemed that the entire College of Cardinals was assembled, confused, but still under the dominion of Pope Alexander VI, the Spaniard, as he was known, and also as Rodrigo Borgia, captain of the Order of the Templars.
"For we wrestle not against flesh and blood," the cardinals were chanting, "but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God and the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked."
"What's the matter with them?" Ezio asked.
"They are confused. They seek guidance," Mario replied grimly. "Come on, we must get away before the Borgia guards take notice of our presence."
He looked back toward the Vatican. There was a glitter of armor in the sunlight.
"Too late. Here they come. Hurry!"
3. The sea of red, the billowing vestments of the cardinals, parted as 4 Borgia guards pushed through in pursuit of Ezio and Mario. Panic took over the crowd as the cardinals started shouting in fear and alarm. Ezio and his uncle found themselves encircled by a human arena. The cardinals, not knowing where to turn, had inadvertently formed a barrier. Perhaps their courage had been unconsciously bolstered by the arrival of the heavily armed guards, breastplates gleaming in the sunlight. The 4 Borgia soldiers had unsheathed their swords and stepped into the circle to face Ezio and Mario, who in turn had drawn their own blades.
"Lay down your weapons and surrender, assassins! You are surrounded and outnumbered!" shouted the lead soldier, stepping forward. Before he could utter another word, Ezio had sprung from his stance, energy returning to his weary limbs. The lead guard had no time to react, not expecting his opponent to be so bold in the face of such overwhelming odds. Ezio's sword arm circled in a blur, the blade whistling as it sliced through the air. The guard tried in vain to raise his sword to parry, but Ezio's movement was simply too quick. The assassin's sword hit its mark with unfaltering accuracy, slicing into the guard's exposed neck, a plume of blood following its impact. The 3 remaining guards stood motionless, astonished at the speed of the assassin and idiotic in the face of such a skilled foe. This delay was their death. Ezio's blade had barely finished its first lethal arc. As he raised his left hand, the mechanism of his hidden blade clicking as the lethal spike revealed itself from his sleeve. It pierced the second guard between the eyes before he could even twitch a muscle in defense.
Meanwhile, Mario, unnoticed, had taken 2 steps sideways, closing the angle of attack on the 2 remaining guards, their attention still entirely drawn to the shocking display of violence unfolding before them. 2 steps more, he closed in and heaved his sword under the breastplate of the nearest guard, the point rising up sickeningly into the man's torso. The guard's face contorted with confused agony. Horror shone in the eyes of the one man left, and he turned as if to flee, but too late. Ezio's blade struck his right flank as Mario's sword sliced into his thigh. The man fell to his knees with a grunt. Mario kicked him over. The 2 assassins looked around. The blood of the guards spread across the paved ground, soaking into the scarlet hems of the cardinal's vestments.
"Let's go, before more of the Borgia men reach us."
They brandished their swords at the now terrified cardinals, who quickly fled the assassins, a path clearing that would lead them from the Vatican. They heard the sound of approaching horses, no doubt more soldiers. They pushed their way forcefully toward the southeast, running at full speed across the expanse of the plaza, away from the Vatican and in the direction of the Tiber. The horses Mario had organized for their escape were tethered just outside the purlieus of the Holy See, but they had to turn to those papal guards who had followed on horseback and were bearing down on them fast. The thundering of hooves echoed on the cobbles. Using their falchions, Ezio and Mario managed to strike away the halberds the guards were thrusting at them. Mario cut one guard down just as he was about to stab Ezio from behind with his spear.
"Not bad for an old man,"
Ezio cried gratefully.
"I expect you to return the favor," replied his uncle, "and not so much of your old man."
"I haven't forgotten everything you taught me."
"I should hope not. Look out!"
And Ezio whirled around just in time to slice the legs of a horse from under a guard who'd galloped up, wielding a vicious-looking mace.
"Buona questa!" shouted Mario. "Good one!"
Ezio leapt sideways, avoiding 2 more of his pursuers, and managed to unsaddle them as they careered past, carried forward by their own momentum. Mario, heavier and older, preferred to stand his ground and cut at his enemies before leaping out of their reach. But once they had gained the edge of the broad square that faced the great cathedral church of St. Peter, the 2 assassins quickly clambered to the safety of the rooftops, scaling the crumbling house walls as nimbly as geckos, and scampered across them, leaping over the gaps where the streets between them made canyons. It wasn't always easy, and at one point Mario nearly didn't make it, his fingers scrabbling for the gutters as he fell just short. Panting hard, Ezio doubled back to pull him clear, succeeding just as the crossbow bolts fired by their pursuers rattled uselessly past them into the sky. But their going was far faster than that of the guards, who, more heavily armored and lacking the skills of the assassins' Brotherhood, tried in vain to keep up by running through the pathways beneath. They gradually fell back. The 2 men clattered to a halt on a roof overlooking a small square on the edge of Trastevere. 2 large, tough-looking chestnut horses were saddled and ready outside a lowly-looking inn, its battered sign bearing the image of a sleeping fox. Watching over the horses was a wall-eyed hunchback with a bushy moustache.
"Johnny,"
hissed Mario. The man looked up and immediately undid the reins by which the horses were tethered to a huge iron ring set into the wall of the inn. Mario instantly leapt down from the rooftop, landing in a crouch, and from there sprang into the saddle of the nearer and larger of the 2 horses. It whinnied and trod the earth in nervous anticipation.
"Shh, campione,"
said Mario to the animal, and then, looking up to where Ezio still stood on the parapet, he yelled,
"Come on, what are you waiting for?"
"Just a minute, Zio," said Ezio, turning to face 2 Borgia guards, who had managed, after all, to struggle up to the roof and were now facing him with, to his astonishment, cocked pistols of a type that was new to him. Where the hell had they got those from? But this was no time for questions. He whirled through the air at them, unleashing his hidden blade and slicing each neatly through the jugular before they could even fire.
"Impressive," said Mario, reining in his impatient horse. "Now get a move on. Cosa diavolo aspetti?"
Ezio threw himself off the roof to land close by the second horse, held firmly by the hunchback, and rebounded off the ground to spring into the animal's saddle. It reared excitedly under his weight, but he immediately had it under control and wheeled it around to follow his uncle as he rode fast toward the Tiber. At the same time, Gianni disappeared into the inn, and a detachment of Borgia cavalry tore around the corner into the square. Digging his heels into the horse's flanks, Ezio sped after his uncle as they made their way at breakneck speed through the broken-down streets of Rome toward the dirty, sluggish river. At their backs they could hear the shouts of the mounted Borgia guards, cursing their prey as Mario and Ezio galloped through the maze of ancient streets, slowly pulling farther away. Having reached Tiber Island, they crossed the river by a rickety bridge that trembled beneath their horses' hooves, and then they doubled back, turning north to ride up the main street leading out of the squalid little town that had once been the capital of the civilized world. They did not stop until they were in the depths of the countryside and had assured themselves that they were out of the reach of their pursuers. Near the settlement of Sette Bagni, in the shade of a massive elm tree by the side of the dusty road that ran alongside the river, they reined their horses in and took time to draw breath. "That was too close, Uncle." The older man shrugged and smiled, a little painfully. From a saddlebag, Mario produced a leather flagon of rough red wine and proffered it to his nephew. "Here," he said, slowly catching his breath. "Good for you." Ezio drank, then grimaced. "Where did you get this?" "It's the best they can do at the Sleeping Fox," said Mario, grinning broadly. "But once we get to Monteriggioni, we'll fare better." Ezio, grinning too, passed the flask back to his uncle, but then his features became troubled. "What is it?" asked Mario in gentler tones. Slowly, Ezio produced the apple from the pouch in which he'd stowed it. "This. What am I to do with it?" Mario looked grave. "It is a heavy responsibility, but it is one you must shoulder alone." "How can I?" "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart tells me to be rid of it, but my brain—" "It was vouchsafed you by whatever powers you encountered in the vault," said Mario solemnly. "They would not have given it back to mortals if there was not a purpose devised for it." "It is too dangerous. If it fell into the wrong hands again—" Ezio looked ominously at the slothful river flowing nearby. Mario watched him expectantly. Ezio hefted the apple in his gloved right hand, but still he hesitated. He knew he couldn't throw such a great treasure away, and his uncle's words had swayed him. Surely Minerva would not have allowed him to take back the apple without reason. "The decision must be yours alone," said Mario. "But if you feel unhappy at having custody of it now, give it to me for safekeeping. You can take it back later, when your mind is calmer." Ezio hesitated still, but then they both heard, in the distance, the sound of thundering hooves and the baying of hounds. "Those bastards don't give up easily," said Mario through gritted teeth. "Come, give it to me." Ezio sighed, but replaced the apple in its leather pouch and swung it over to Mario, who quickly stowed it in his saddlebag. "And now," said Mario, "we must jump these nags into the river and swim them across. That'll put the damned dogs off our scent, and even if they're bright enough to ford the Tiber themselves, we'll be able to lose them in the woods over there. Come on, I want to be in Monteriggioni by this time tomorrow." "How hard do you expect to ride?" Mario dug his heels into his mount's flanks. The beast reared, foam at the corners of its mouth. "Very hard," he said, "because from now on we don't simply have Rodrigo to contend with. His son and his daughter are with him, Cesare and Lucrezia. And they are the most dangerous people you are ever likely to meet." 4. It was the afternoon of the following day when the little walled town of Monteriggioni, dominated by Mario's Rocca, appeared on its hill on the horizon. They had made better time than they'd expected, and had now eased their pace to spare the horses. "And then Minerva told me about the sun," Ezio was saying. "She told of a disaster that happened long ago, and foretold of another which is to come."
"But not for some time in the future, vero?" said Mario. "Then we need not fret about it."
"Si," Ezio replied. "I wonder how much more work we have to do." He paused reflectively. "Perhaps it will soon be finished."
"Would that be so bad?"
Ezio was about to reply when he was interrupted by the sound of an explosion. Cannon fire coming from the direction of the town. He drew his sword, rising in his saddle to scan the ramparts.
"Don't worry," said Mario, laughing heartily. "It's only exercises. We've upgraded the arsenal here and installed new cannon all along the battlements. We have training sessions daily."
"As long as they aren't aiming at us."
"Don't worry," said Mario again. "It's true that the men still need to keep their eye in, but they have enough sense not to fire at the boss."
A short while later, they were riding through the open principal gate of the town and up the broad main thoroughfare which led to the citadel. As they did so, crowds gathered to line the street, looking at Ezio with a mixture of respect, admiration, and affection. "Welcome back, Ezio!" one woman called. "Grazie, Madonna." Ezio smiled back, inclining his head slightly. "3 cheers for Ezio!" a child's voice rang out. "Buongiorno, fratellino," Ezio said to him. Turning to Mario, he added, "It's good to be home."
"I think they're more pleased to see you than to see me," said Mario, but he was smiling as he spoke, and in fact much of the cheering, especially from the older townsmen, was for him.
"I'm looking forward to seeing the old family seat again," said Ezio. "It's been a while."
"It has indeed, and there are a couple of people there who will be looking forward to seeing you."
"Who?"
"Can't you guess? You can't be that preoccupied with your duties to the Brotherhood."
"Of course, you mean my mother and my sister. How are they?"
"Well, your sister was very unhappy when her husband died, but time heals most things, and I think she's much better now. In fact, there she is."
They had ridden into the courtyard of Mario's fortified residence now, and as they dismounted, Ezio's sister, Claudia, appeared at the top of the marble staircase that led up to the main entrance, flew down it, and ran into her brother's arms. "Brother," she cried, hugging him, "your return home is the best birthday present I could have wished for." "Claudia, my dearest," said Ezio, holding her close, "it is good to be back. How is Mother?" "Well, thanks be to God. She's dying to see you. We've been on tenterhooks ever since the news reached us that you were returning, and your fame goes before you."
"Let's go in," said Mario.
"There's someone else who'll be glad to see you," continued Claudia, taking his arm and escorting him up the staircase. "The Countess of Forli." "Caterina, here?" Ezio tried to keep the excitement out of his voice. "We did not know exactly when you would arrive. She and Mother are with the abbess, but they will be here by sunset."
"Business first," said Mario, knowingly. "I am calling a meeting of the Council of the Brotherhood here tonight. Machiavelli, I know, is especially keen to talk to you."
"Is it finished, then?" asked Claudia intently. "Is the Spaniard truly dead?" Ezio's grey eyes hardened. "I will explain everything at the meeting this evening," he told her. "Very well," replied Claudia, but her own eyes were troubled as she took her leave. "And please, give my greetings to the Countess when she returns," Ezio called after her. "I will see her and Mother this evening. First, I have business to attend to with Mario that will not wait." Once they were alone, Mario's tone became serious.
"You must prepare well for tonight, Ezio. Machiavelli will be here by sunset, and I know he has many questions for you." We will discuss matters now, and then I advise you to take some time off. It won't hurt you to get to know the town again a little." After a session of deep conversation with Mario in his study, Ezio made his way back into Monteriggioni. The question of the Pope's survival hung heavily over him, and he sought distraction from it. Mario had suggested he visit his tailor to order some new clothes to replace his travel-stained ones, and first he made his way to the man's shop, where he found him sitting cross-legged on his workbench, sewing a brocade cloak of a rich emerald green. Ezio liked the tailor, a good-natured fellow, a little older than Ezio was himself. The tailor greeted him warmly. "To what do I owe the honor?" he asked. "I think I'm due some new clothes," said Ezio a little ruefully. "Tell me what you think. Be honest." "Even if it were not my job to sell you clothes, signore, I would have to advise you that a new suit would be the making of you." "I thought as much. Very well. I'll measure you now, then you can pick out the colors you'd like." Ezio submitted himself to the tailor's ministrations and chose a discreet dark grey velvet for the doublet with matching hose in wool. "Can it be ready by tonight?" The tailor smiled. "Not if you want me to do a good job on it, signore, but we can try for a fitting toward midday tomorrow." "Very well," replied Ezio, hoping that the meeting he was to attend that evening would not result in his having to leave Monteriggioni immediately. He was making his way across the main square of the town when he noticed an attractive woman who was struggling with an unwieldy box of red and yellow flowers, clearly too heavy for her to lift. At that time of day there were few people around, and Ezio had always found it difficult to resist a damsel in distress. "Can I lend you a hand?" he asked, coming up to her. She smiled at him. "Yes, you're just the man I need. My gardener was supposed to pick these up for me, but his wife's sick, so he had to go home, and as I was passing this way in any case, I said I'd fetch them. But this box is far too heavy for me. Do you think you could?" "Of course." Ezio stooped and hefted the box onto his shoulder. "So many flowers. You're a lucky woman." "Even luckier now that I've run into you." There was no doubt that she was flirting with him. "You could have asked your husband to fetch them for you, or one of your other servants," he said. "I only have one other servant, and she isn't half as strong as I am," replied the woman. "And as for a husband, I have none." "I see." "I ordered these flowers for Claudia Auditore's birthday." The woman looked at him. "That sounds like fun." "It will be." She paused. "In fact, if you'd like to help me out some more, I am rather looking for someone with a bit of class to escort me to it." "Do you think I have enough class?" She was bolder now. "Yes. No one in this entire town walks with greater bearing than you, sir. I am sure Claudia's brother Ezio himself would be impressed." Ezio smiled. "You flatter me, but what do you know of this Ezio?" "Claudia, who is a particular friend of mine, thinks the world of him, but he rarely visits her, and from what I can gather, he's rather distant." Ezio decided it was time to come clean. "It's true, alas. I have been distant." The woman gasped. "Oh, no! You are Ezio? I don't believe it. Claudia did say you were expected back. The party's supposed to be a surprise for her. Promise you won't say a word?" "You'd better tell me who you are now." "Oh, of course, I am Angelina Ceresa. Now, promise." "What will you do to keep me quiet?" She looked at him archly. "Oh, I am sure I can think of several things. I'm longing to hear what they are." They had reached the door of Angelina's house by this time. Angelina's elderly housekeeper opened it to them, and Ezio placed the box of flowers on a stone bench in the courtyard. He faced Angelina and smiled. "Now are you going to tell me?" "Later." "Why not now?" "Signore, I assure you, it will be worth the wait."
Little did either of them know that events would overtake them, and they would not meet again. Ezio took his leave, and seeing that the day was drawing in, directed his walk back toward the citadel. As he was approaching the stables, he noticed a child, a little girl, wandering down the middle of the street, apparently alone. He was about to speak to her when he was interrupted by the sound of frantic shouting and the thunder of a horse's hooves. Quicker than thought, he snatched up the child and moved her to the shelter of a doorway. He'd been in the nick of time. Around the corner, a powerful warhorse came at a gallop, fully harnessed but riderless. In less than hot pursuit, and on foot, came Mario's stablemaster, an elderly man called Federico, whom Ezio recognized.
"Torna qui, maledetto cavallo!"
yelled Federico helplessly after the disappearing horse. Seeing Ezio, he said,
"Can you help me, please, sir? It's your uncle's favorite steed. I was just about to unsaddle and groom him. Something must have scared him. He's highly strung as it is."
"Don't worry, father. I'll try and get him back for you."
Thank you.
Federico mopped his brow.
"I'm getting too old for this."
"Don't worry. Just stay here and keep an eye on this child. I think she's lost."
"Surely."
Ezio raced off after the horse, which he found without difficulty. It had calmed down and was even grazing some hay that was loaded into a parked wagon. It balked slightly when Ezio approached, but then recognized him and did not run. He laid a comforting hand on its neck and patted it reassuringly before taking its bridle and leading it gently back the way they had come. On the way, he had the opportunity to do another good deed. He encountered a young woman frantic with anxiety, who turned out to be the mother of the lost child. Ezio explained what had happened, taking care to tone down the degree of danger the little girl had actually been in. Once he'd told her where the girl was, she ran ahead of him, calling out her child's name, "Sophia, Sophia!" and Ezio heard an answering cry of, "Mama!" Minutes later, he had rejoined the little group and handed the reins over to Federico, who, thanking him again, begged him not to say anything to Mario. Ezio promised not to, and Federico led the horse back to the stables. The mother was still waiting with her daughter. Ezio turned to them with a smile.
"She wants to say a thank you,"
said the mother.
"Thank you,"
said Sophia dutifully, looking up at him with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Stay with your mother in future," said Ezio kindly. "Don't leave her alone like that. Capisci?" The little girl nodded mutely.
"We'd be lost without you and your family to watch over us, signore," said the mother.
"We do what we can," Ezio said, but his thoughts were troubled as he entered the citadel. Even though he was pretty sure he could stand his ground, he was not looking forward to his encounter with Machiavelli. But there was still time enough before the meeting, and to avoid brooding on the course it might take, but also from natural curiosity, Ezio first climbed the ramparts to have a closer look at the new cannon Mario had installed and was so proud of. There were several of them, each with a pile of iron cannonballs neatly stacked by their wheels, beautifully chased in cast bronze. The biggest had barrels 10 feet long, and Mario had told him that these weighed as much as 20,000 pounds, 5. When Ezio entered the great hall of Mario's citadel, the shadows of evening were already gathering, and servants were beginning to light torches and candles to dispel the gloom. The gloom accorded with Ezio's increasingly sombre mood as the hour of the meeting approached. So wrapped up in his own thoughts was he, that he did not at first notice the person hovering by the massive fireplace, her slight but strong figure dwarfed by the giant caryatids that flanked the chimney, and so was startled when the woman approached him, touching his arm. Immediately he recognized her, and his features softened into an expression of pure pleasure. "Buonasera, Ezio," she said, for her a little shyly, he thought. "Buonasera, Caterina," he replied, bowing to the Countess of Forlì. Their former intimacy was some way in the past, though neither of them had forgotten it, and when she had touched his arm, both, Ezio thought, had felt the chemistry of the moment. "Claudia told me you were here, and I have been looking forward to seeing you, but," he hesitated, "Monteriggioni is far from Forlì, and—" "You needn't flatter yourself that I have come all this way just on your account," she said with a trace of her former sharpness, though he could see by her smile that she was not entirely serious, and, for himself, he knew that he was still drawn to this fiercely independent and dangerous woman. "I am always willing to be of service to you, Madonna, in any way I can." He meant it. "Some ways are harder than others," she countered, and now there was a tough note in her voice. "What is it?" "It is not a simple matter," continued Caterina Sforza. "I come in search of an alliance." "Tell me more." "I am afraid your work is not over yet, Ezio. The papal armies are marching on Forlì. My dominion is small, but fortunately, or unfortunately for me, it lies in an area of the utmost strategic importance to whoever controls it." "And you desire my help?" "My forces on their own are weak. Your condottieri would be a great asset to my cause." "This is something I will have to discuss with Mario." "He will not refuse me." "And nor will I." "By helping me, you will not just be doing me a good deed. You will be taking a stand against the forces of evil we have always been united against." As they spoke, Mario appeared. "Ezio, Contessa, we are gathered and await you," he said, his face unusually serious. "We will talk more of this," Ezio told her. "I am bidden to a meeting that my uncle has convened. I am expected to explain myself, I think, but afterward, let us arrange to see each other. Afterward." "The meeting concerns me, too," said Caterina. "Shall we go in?"